The kneel was not a request. Amara Sinclair understood that before the older man in the gray suit had finished the sentence in which he had demanded it. She had been in enough rooms in her life, in courtrooms, in federal interview suites, in the offices of CEOs who had signed documents they should not have signed, and who needed her to find a way for them to have not signed them. To know the difference between a request and an instruction, and to know that an instruction delivered in the cadence of a request was the most dangerous kind of instruction there was. Because an instruction delivered as a request offered the listener the illusion of choice. And the punishment for getting the choice wrong was always heavier than the punishment for refusing an order outright. The older man's name was Bae Sung Jin. He was 61 years old, the chief financial officer of Hanwoo Holdings, and the man who had hired her firm 6 weeks ago to find the $7 million discrepancy in the second quarter reconciliation. He had told her at their first meeting that the assignment was sensitive. He had told her at their second meeting that the assignment was extremely sensitive. He had not used the word sensitive at this morning's meeting. He had used a different set of words. He had said, "Miss Sinclair, we have determined that the discrepancy was introduced by an error in your firm's preliminary access procedure. Your firm's insurance will cover the loss, but the company's chairman requires a formal acknowledgement of responsibility. You will provide it in the manner customary to this company." The manner customary to this company was a deep bow, performed kneeling, in front of the assembled board. Amara was not Korean. Amara was a 34-year-old black woman from St. Louis, Missouri, with a master's degree in forensic accounting from the University of Illinois and a CFA certification she had earned at 26. And she had been working with international clients for 9 years, and she had performed the bow, standing, not kneeling, 3 times in her career, all at the conclusions of engagements where the bow had been the appropriate cultural gesture, and her colleagues had explained, in advance and gently, what it meant and what its limits were. She knew the gesture. She respected the gesture. She was prepared, in normal circumstances, to perform the gesture when it was the right thing to do. This was not the right thing to do. She knew it was not the right thing to do, because she had spent the last 4 nights in the locked conference room on the 32nd floor with her laptop and her notes and her flask of cold green tea, going line by line through the second quarter reconciliation, and she had found the discrepancy. The discrepancy had not been introduced by an error in her firm's preliminary access procedure. The discrepancy had been introduced by the deliberate adjustment of 17 entries across 4 subsidiary accounts, performed by a single user account, over the course of 6 business days in late August, by someone who had access credentials that Amara's firm had never been granted. She had identified the user account. She had identified the IP address from which the adjustments had been made. She had identified, from the network logs, the floor of the building from which the IP address had been routed. The floor was this one. The 34th floor. The executive floor. The floor on which she was standing right now. She had emailed her preliminary findings to the senior partner at her firm at 4:30 this morning. She had encrypted the email. She had used the second of the 3 encryption keys she had been issued, because the first encryption key was used for communications she was prepared to defend in any forum, and the second was used for communications she expected to need to defend in a forum she could not yet name. She had not yet identified the user. She suspected she did not need to. The kneel was the identification, performed in advance, by the people who needed her not to finish the work. The boardroom was on the 34th floor of the Hanwoo Tower, a building of black glass and brushed steel that sat on a corner of the Loop, where the rents were rumored to be the highest in Chicago, and where the building's actual occupancy was rumored, accurately, to be 23%. The boardroom itself was not a boardroom the way other boardrooms were boardrooms. It was a temple disguised as a conference room, 12 meters long, with a single black walnut table that had been carved from a single tree by a single craftsman in Yangju, lit by recessed fixtures that threw warm light upward against the silk-paneled walls, and surrounded by 40 leather chairs in 2 concentric arcs. The inner arc was the board. The outer arc was the company's other senior leadership, the men and women who were permitted to witness but not to speak. At the head of the table, in the chair set slightly apart, was the chairman. The chairman's name was Han Yi-jun. He had not spoken yet this morning. He had walked into the boardroom at exactly 9 a.m., taken his seat at the head of the table, accepted a cup of tea from a young woman in a navy suit, set the cup down on the small lacquered tray at his right hand, and looked at Amara Sinclair, once, for perhaps 3 seconds, with an expression she had not been able to read. He had not spoken since. Bae Sung-jin had spoken. Bae Sung-jin had explained the situation. Bae Sung-jin had described the discrepancy, the firm's preliminary procedure, the regrettable error, and the expected resolution. Bae Sung-jin had said the chairman requires a formal acknowledgement of responsibility, and you will provide it, and in the manner customary to this company. The chairman, at the head of the table, had not moved. Amara had been counting his stillness, the way she counted everything when her nervous system began to run on substitute fuel. He had blinked twice in 7 minutes. His hands rested flat on the table on either side of the small lacquered tray. His eyes had returned to her face twice, once during Bae Sung-jin's description of the discrepancy, once during the word kneel. Both times his expression had not changed. Both times she had registered that the not changing was itself information. He was, she understood, the only person in the room who knew exactly what was being asked of her, and exactly what asking it would cost. Bae Sung-jin finished his sentence. The room waited. Amara was standing 2 meters from the foot of the table, on the inner edge of the outer arc of chairs. She had been escorted to the position by a young man in a black suit, who had not introduced himself. The carpet under her feet was thick and unyielding. She had worn the wrong shoes for kneeling. She had worn the right shoes for forensic accounting, which were the shoes she had worn into the building and the shoes she intended to walk out of the building in. She lifted her chin. She looked, not at Bae Sung-jin, but at Han Yi-jun. "No," she said. The room did not gasp. The room did not move. The room did not produce any of the reactions a less trained room would have produced to the word "no" spoken in this configuration. The room did exactly the thing it had been trained to do, which was to wait for the chairman. Bae Sung-jin's face went through a small, careful sequence of adjustments that Amara registered without analyzing. The brief tightening at the jaw, the small lowering of the chin, the half-second pause before he spoke again, and then he said, in the same voice he had used to deliver the original demand, "Miss Sinclair, perhaps you misunderstood." "The bow is, I understood," she said. She was speaking only to him now, because Han Yi-jun had not yet given her permission to address him directly, and she was a woman who knew the protocols of a room even when she was in the process of refusing one of them. "The bow is a customary gesture," Bae Sung-jin said. "It is performed as an expression of, 'I know what it is performed as, Mr. Bae. I have performed it before. I am refusing this performance because the premise of it is false. The discrepancy in the second quarter reconciliation was not introduced by my firm. The discrepancy was introduced by a deliberate adjustment of 17 entries across 4 subsidiary accounts, performed from an internal user account. from an IP address routed through this floor between the 18th and the 23rd of August. I have not yet identified the user. I will identify the user. When I do, I will make a formal report to my firm's senior partner, who will make a formal report to your external auditor, who will make a formal report to the appropriate regulatory body. I cannot, in those circumstances, perform an apology for an error I did not make. I will not. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The carpet absorbed her words the way the carpet absorbed everything else in this room, completely, without echo, leaving each sentence to land in the silence that had been engineered to receive it. She heard a single breath, somewhere in the outer arc, that had not been intended to be audible. She did not turn to identify the source. Bae Sung-jin was looking at her now in a way he had not looked at her in the 6 weeks of their professional acquaintance. The look contained a calibration she had not yet seen him make. He was, she realized, recalibrating not whether to remove her, but how quickly, and through which mechanism, and with what level of subsequent cleanup. She had spoken the IP address routing on the record. She had spoken the floor on the record. The boardroom, she now understood, looking at the small black domes mounted in the ceiling at the 4 corners, was recording. The recording was probably not going to be deleted today. The recording was probably not going to be deleted at all, because the man at the head of the table had not given the order, and the recording would now exist in some configuration of backup that Bae Sung-jin did not control. He had assumed that the threat of the kneel would produce the kneel. She had not knelt. She had spoken instead. He had not, in his calculations of the morning's choreography, accounted for the possibility that the forensic accountant would refuse to confess, and would, in the refusing, place the actual evidence into the room's recorded transcript. Han Yi-jeon moved. It was the first movement he had made in 12 minutes. He lifted his right hand off the table, slowly, without dramatics, and he pushed the lacquered tray with the teacup on it a small, precise distance to his left, so that the tray would not be disturbed by what was about to happen. He set his palms flat on the edge of the table. He pushed back from his chair. He stood up. The board rose with him. It was a reflexive movement, trained over years. The chairman stands, the board stands, and 40 people came to their feet within a single second of his standing. The sound of 40 chairs being pushed back from a table was the loudest sound the boardroom had produced all morning. He did not look at the board. He walked around the head of the table, slowly, with the unhurried economy of motion she had been registering as his physical signature since the moment he had entered the room, and he crossed the space between the table and the position where Amara was standing. He stopped 2 meters from her. The board, which had risen in reflex, did not know what to do now. The chairman did not normally walk to the foot of the table. The chairman did not normally approach a contractor in the middle of a board session. The chairman did not normally do anything but sit in the chair set slightly apart and let other people perform the rituals that the company's protocols had assigned to other people. He looked at her. His face was as composed as it had been at the head of the table. But up close, she could see what she had not been able to see from her position in the outer arc, that the composure was a constructed thing, layered over something else that was working underneath it, and the something else had been working since the moment Bae Sung-jin had said the word kneel. He spoke. In English. Quietly, Miss Sinclair. You said the IP address routed through this floor. Yes, you said the user account was an internal account. Yes, you said you had not yet identified the user. Yes, he nodded. Once, he did not turn toward the board. He did not address them. He continued to look at her, and he asked her one more question, in the same quiet voice. And do you know, he said, whose office that IP address corresponded to? She held his eyes. "I know which floor." "Whose office?" She paused. She did know. She had known since 2:15 this morning, when the final routing trace had completed, and she had sat in the locked conference room on the 32nd floor with the laptop open and the cold tea beside her, and the small, unbearable understanding that the office in question was 3 doors down from the office she had been given to work in. She had known whose office it was the way a forensic accountant knows the things she has not yet been allowed to formally know, quietly, factually, without yet having the permission of process to act on the knowledge. She said the name. She said it to him, not to the room. Bae-sung Jin. Han Yi-jun did not turn to look at the man whose name she had just said. He did something else. He bent at the waist in a single careful motion, and he lowered himself onto the carpet at her feet, and he placed his forehead against the floor, and he held the position. "Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before the room finishes understanding what it has just seen, take a breath with me. Make sure you've subscribed, leave a like if your heart is on that carpet, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far our little dark romance family stretches tonight. Every like, every comment, every soul who finds their quiet corner here keeps the door open for the stories where the kneel happens in the direction nobody was ready for. So pour something warm, dim the lights, and stay close. Some men ask women to kneel for them. The dangerous ones kneel first. Let me show you what happens next." The room did not breathe. There is a kind of silence that happens in rooms when a thing has occurred that the room has no protocol for, and the room is forced in real time to invent the protocol on the spot, in front of witnesses, with the original action still in progress. The Hanwoo boardroom on the 34th floor entered that kind of silence the moment Han Yi-jun's forehead touched the carpet, and the silence persisted for the duration of his bow, which Amara, who had begun counting the moment he had begun lowering, measured at 14 seconds. She did not move during the 14 seconds. She could not. The chairman of Hanwoo Holdings, the man whose name appeared on documents that other men in this room had been afraid to read aloud, was performing, in front of his entire senior leadership, the precise ritual that had been demanded of her, in the precise form that the company's protocols had codified, on behalf of an offense that had not been hers. He was apologizing. He was apologizing for the room. He was telling the room, with his body, that the company's request of her had been a wrong the company had committed, and that the company, meaning him, accepted responsibility for the commission of the wrong, and that the only person in this boardroom who had not done something requiring an apology this morning was the woman standing 2 meters from his bowed forehead. He held the position for the full 14 seconds. Then he straightened, slowly, with the same economy of motion he had used to descend, and he came back to his full height, and he looked at her again. His face had not changed. The room's had. She could not see all 40 faces from where she was standing, but she could see Bae-sung Jin's, and Bae-sung Jin's face was the color of a man who had understood, in the 14 seconds his chairman had spent on the carpet, that the next 12 hours of his life were going to be very different from the 12 hours he had planned this morning. Han Yi-jun spoke. In Korean, 3 sentences. The young man in the black suit who had escorted her to her position, Amara registered now that there were 2 of them, one at each side of the doorway, moved to Bae-sung Jin's chair without further instruction. They did not touch him. They simply stood, one on each side of his chair, and waited. Bae-sung Jin understood the choreography. He stood. He buttoned the bottom button of his suit jacket, a small reflex, the gesture of a man whose body had been trained for boardrooms to such a depth that it performed boardroom courtesies even at the moment his career was ending, and he walked between the 2 men, and the three of them left the room together, and the door closed behind them with the small, expensive click that the doors in this building had been engineered to make. Han Yi-jun did not watch him leave. He continued to look at Amara. "Miss Sinclair, yes. Your firm's engagement with this company is concluded. Your firm's invoice will be paid in full, plus a penalty fee in the amount of 3 times the contract value as compensation for the events of this morning. You will not be required to identify the user account or to complete any further report. The report has been concluded by other means." "I understand. You may go." She did not move. She had been the kind of woman, since the age of 17, who could read the shape of an exit when she was being given one. And the exit she was being given right now was a clean one. It was, in fact, the cleanest exit she had ever been offered in the course of a forensic engagement that had identified an internal actor. She was being released from the work. She was being released from the report. She was being paid 4 times what her firm had been promised. She was being given the door, and the door was open, and the 2 men who had stood at it were no longer at it because they were currently escorting the actual offender into a room she did not need to think about. She did not move. She looked at Han Yi-jun. "I have a question, sir." The corner of his mouth did the thing it did, not a smile, the thing that lived just beside one, and he inclined his head a fraction. "Ask." You bowed in my direction. The bow was in the form the company's protocols specify for an apology from the senior to the junior. The junior, in this case, is me. The apology was, by the protocol's own logic, mine to accept or not accept. You did not wait for my acceptance. You straightened and gave the instruction to remove Mr. Bay. Why? He looked at her. He looked at her for what felt like a long time, and when he spoke, his voice was even quieter than it had been during the bow. "Because if I had waited for your acceptance, Miss Sinclair, you would have been within your rights to refuse it. And if you had refused it, I would not have known what to do." The room was still recording. Amara, who had spent 34 years learning to read what men said when they did not have a script for what they were saying, registered the sentence and the silence after it. And she registered also, with a slow, clean precision she did not yet have a name for, that the chairman of Hanwoo Holdings had just admitted, in front of his own boardroom, that there existed in his life one configuration of human interaction for which he had no prepared protocol, and that the configuration involved her. She thought about it. She thought about her firm. She thought about the 4 nights in the locked conference room. She thought about the $7 million discrepancy and the 17 entries and the IP address routed through the floor she was standing on, and the man being escorted at this moment into a room she would never see. She thought about the bow. "I accept the apology," she said. He inclined his head again. A small motion. Acknowledgement. "Thank you, Miss Sinclair, and I have a counter condition." The board, still standing, still in the configuration the chairman's standing had produced, adjusted, very slightly, in its outer arc. She heard it more than she saw it. She did not turn to look. "Name it," Han Yi-jun said. "I do not want the penalty fee. I want my firm's contracted invoice paid in full, and nothing beyond it. The penalty fee implies that the events of this morning can be settled with money. I am not in a position to accept the implication. The bow settled them. The money would unsettle them again." He looked at her for a very long moment. "Done," he said. "Thank you." "Miss Sinclair?" "Yes. When you walk out of this building, the 2 men at the front desk will give you a phone number. The phone number does not belong to this company. It belongs to me. You are under no obligation to use it. You are under no obligation to remember it. You may discard the card at the curb. But the number will exist. And if, At any point in your future you require something that is within my power to provide. A piece of information, a removal of an obstacle, a difficult phone call made on your behalf. I will provide it. Once, without conditions, without expecting reciprocation. She did not answer immediately. Why? She said. Because you did not kneel, he said, and because in 22 years of running this company, you are the first person I have watched not kneel when this company asked them to. I am not in the habit of forgetting people who do things I have not seen done before. He inclined his head a final time. She inclined hers, the small, careful angle her colleagues had taught her, standing, not kneeling. And she turned, and she walked out of the boardroom of Hanwoo Holdings on the 34th floor of the Hanwoo Tower. And she rode the elevator down 34 floors in silence. And she collected the small white card with the phone number on it from the front desk. And she walked out into the November cold of a Chicago that did not yet know what had happened in the building behind her. She put the card in the inside pocket of her coat. She did not yet know whether she would use it. She knew only that for the first time in her career, and possibly for the first time in her adult life, she had been in a room with a powerful man who had asked her to make herself smaller, and she had refused. And the refusal had not cost her. It had, instead, been answered with a forehead on a carpet. She walked the 6 blocks to the bus stop in the wind, and she thought about the bow, and she thought about the phone number in her pocket. And she thought about the man at the head of the table who had said, I would not have known what to do. She did not throw the card away at the curb.